Hello, everyone. This is Jimmy Cultist back again with another RPG turn-based combat video. And today we're going to be discussing a new and improved system for turn-taking. A little preliminary thing I want to get out of the way before we start is that this new system I've developed came about because of a commenter's request. And he was asking for a way to fix the old system, but in doing so I discovered this new and better way of making it, so I thought I'd give him a little shout out. Kiddo Kenshi 22. He requested to know how to fix the enemy turn-taking sequence, and I discovered something which improves it quite a bit. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the changes I've instituted for the player's turn-taking system real quick in preparation. There is now a turn skip feature. I've hooked up this little tag. The output now goes into this. I've moved the enemy go chip back a bit so that they begin their turn quicker if you skip. But I've also added a timer from the result of this AND gate, set to positional, 5-second target time, works great. And I've taken the timer finished signal and attached it to the node. It's just kind of like a little go-between thing, not really super important. It helps create the delay when the players need to get back into position, but if you skip turns, it'll just go instantly to the enemy's turns, and it works pretty good. And I've instituted a new variable labeled player turns with a maximum count of 1,000, possible minimum count of 0. And I've hooked it up to a calculator labeled to set to equal. I've connected the output to the power because I want this only to be active when the variable is active. And I've connected the current value also to the B input, or operand 2. And above I have this other calculator which is just set to add. And it's connected, the result is connected to operand 1, or the A port. And here is the crowning achievement. A zone set to detect a label, and it detects both invisible and non-collidable, but it doesn't really matter too much. I've widened the zone to include the entire, space, essentially. And it detects friends, which all of the players are labeled friend. And the handy thing about trigger zones is they have this thing called number detected output, and it'll detect how many objects or people are labeled friend. In this case, it's 3. And by connecting it to the add, we'll get the output for the maximum number of players. And by doing so, and connecting it to the player turn count in B, so basically simple math, number of turns, number of people present, equals a result, which is basically the end of the turn, which I've hooked up to this new skip turns chip with a node set to a timeline, set to play once, 200% playback speed, and I have a zone set to detect tag, and it's set to in scene, and it's turn skip, which you'll recognize up here. And I've also connected the touchpad. In case you want to skip your turn, I've connected the touchpad to this very same node. But that's just some preliminary stuff before we get started. And I'll explain how you trigger this variable. Basically, every player, after they take an action... Yeah, let's go over to player 1 here. Every time they take an action and complete the sequence, at the end of it, there's a variable modifier set to add 1, and it's labeled player turns, just like this fellow here. which means when he takes one turn, it will now be 1, 1, and 1, so that makes 3. And since this is constantly adapting to how many players are on screen, you can basically just put in however many people you want, and it'll calculate the maximum number of turns needed before the end effortlessly. I've done the same thing with the enemies, but it's a slightly different system. Because you can select the players, it's a little bit easier to work around the fact that when one of them dies, you know, the sequence will be reset. It's not really a big deal because you can select them easily. However, with the enemies, since they're not selected by the player, there's kind of an issue where, you know, what happens if you kill number 1 in the sequence? How will number 2 go? But I've addressed that. I'll get right down to it. Oh, there's one other little thing I'd like to talk about real quick before we do that. I've added a bunch of tags inside here. I've also added a variable, but I'm not going to address that just yet, because I have a separate video about this variable and what it does, but you can kind of guess by what it's called. I've added this little turn skip tag in here, and you know what triggers that. The skip turns chip. But I've added it to plus so that when you press skip turns, it'll instantly make all these things turn red and make your players unable to move. And I put it inside the chip instead of outside like I previously had it because I felt it was sort of a clutter of wires and I didn't like the look of it. I'm still leaving this one out here though, because it triggers the normal turn sequence, you know, when you take 1, take 2, take 3, or whatever. I've also added a player turn reset tag here, which connects to the reset count, and that's just triggered by, you know, when your turn begins anew. This thing here, player turn reset. Also, I've added a variable that resets this at the end of every, you know, session, as you'll need if you want to restart the turn cycle. But now we'll get to the enemies, since they're more important anyway. I stripped away all that previous logic that you saw before. Well, you may not see it. You might just replace that old video, but anybody familiar with the old system knows about how I had this big, complicated sequencing system before. And it still detects a tag labeled enemy go, which, you know, this little fella here at the end of our turn sequence for the players. And it connects to a counter, which connects to a chip labeled sequence, but we're going to get into the variable part of it. It's very similar to how I did the player variable. It sets how many, you know, it detects how many foes are on screen and uses this output to the number detected output. It's pretty similar. It has a couple of things different. It triggers the player, you know, team go, which basically allows the players to start their turn cycle with a tag. And it has an enemy turns variable reset as opposed to a player turns reset. But other than that, this logic is pretty much the same as what we saw over there. The main difference is this, the sequence. Also, don't forget to connect this tag to this reset count so that everything works properly. In here, though, we have the sequence. A timeline set to sustain with a NOT gate in the power. And here we have a selector hooked up to 3 separate timelines, all set to sustain. And they have a zone set to detect tag inside. And this triggers the enemy's attack. And here we have the return chip, which basically triggers, you know, where the enemy will return to when they're done taking their turn. Which I have modified the enemy's attack sequence a little bit. I've made it shorter. you can see it's drastically faster than it used to be. I've left the playback speed of the overall timeline the same, but the attack timeline is now 200%. And I've shortened the return timeline, and I've set a variable with a value of 1. Basically, it counts up once the sequence all, is complete. It'll turn on this and add 1 point to it. And depending on how many AI are present, maybe just 1 will be needed to complete the turn sequence, or maybe 2. Either way, it'll adapt based off the number of enemies on screen. And you can pretty much have them emitted in any order, just so long as they're within these fields. And you can add more of them if you want to as well. If you want to add like 6 or 7 fields, but that's a different amount of work that you're going to have to do there. The only thing that's different between these is the position of the zone in the tag. Player 2, player 3 for the AI. That's the only thing that's really different. And it's the sequence. And I control the sequence with these 3 zones. So if it detects a foe here, it'll trigger this first attack output. But if there's no foe there, it'll just skip over and head on to the next one and trigger this one. And so on in sequence. And you would need more of these if you have more players or whatever, more enemy AI, but it should work just fine. Another thing I've done is I've increased the speed of the return follower. It's now 15 because I want the AI to be really snappy. I feel like if you had a lot of them, it could get pretty tedious. So they're going to be a bit sped up. I've also put, for the big fellow, you're going to want to put this enemy turns count variable or whatever at the end as well of his thing, just to remind you. And now we're going to go ahead and test this all in sequence. First, I want to demonstrate that we can kill the initial foe without damaging the sequence, so I'll go ahead and take him out with a grenade. And then I'll skip turn by pressing the touchpad. And there they go. They're much faster. I might add an animation so that they look a little less stupid when they're running. They do look kind of stiff and goofy right now. But it's just to demonstrate how things work. And now we're going to take out this middle fellow. And just see how it works with all, two characters taken out of the equation. Still works just fine. Surprisingly snappy, actually. Yeah, but that's a better system of turn-taking for you. It works the same with the players. We'll go ahead and test them just to make sure everything's running okay on their end. Because we've been skipping the turns, but we probably ought to, take them to demonstrate this. Another thing I'd like to demonstrate is how you can actually have them die and it won't interrupt anything. It'll all still work normally if my calculations are correct. And they appear not to be correct. Let's take a look at this and see what's going on. Oh, I see what it is. Yes, it's, he would have to be dead at the beginning of the session. He wouldn't die during it. Although, if you had poison on him, you might want him to die during. But we'll figure out a way to correct this. I guess an easy way would be just have it so that when he dies, he takes a player turn. Here in the death chip, we'll just copy out this variable. Just have it so he takes a player turn. I think it's lowercase. Let's go ahead and check that just to be sure. Yeah, it's lowercase. Pretty sure that did the trick. Yeah, that did it. Just make sure to put that in their death chips. That way, you know, even if they die during combat, it'll still trigger the sequence as intended. Let's double test it though, just to double be sure about that. I think the main problem is that he's still labeled... Oh, wait a minute. Yes, actually, that's really simple. He's still labeled as a friend. So it's still detecting him in the sequence. Now, I might leave him labeled as a friend rather than... I guess the easy fix would be, you know, turn off his friend label. The issue with that, though, is if you wanted to have a healing thing where you revive him, that might get in the way, so I'd say leave him labeled friend, and we'll just add this turn-taking thing at the end of all their death chips. But add it in a different sequence so that it's triggered differently, perhaps. I don't know. Actually, that might not work. We'll just put them all... Let's see what happens if we have, like, 2 of our fellows die. I just am interested in what would happen if it would properly, you know... Yep, it did properly count 2 turns. Will it play the sequence normally, though, if we skip turn? Yeah, it did. Of course, the AI is having trouble dealing with that. Seems to work fine, though. I mean, normally you wouldn't have a big damaging zone that hurts the AI, but you know what I mean. It seems to work okay. I will be talking about the subject of death on a separate occasion, because there's something interesting I have to say about that. But this is mainly just turn-taking. We're all done with, though. I think we've covered all the different loopholes of death and turn sequence taking, so... Thanks for watching. If you have any thoughts, leave a comment, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss future videos. If you would like to support us financially, consider clicking the join button to become a member and unlock perks. You can also leave a super thanks in the comments, which we would appreciate, or a one-time donation on Ko-fi, link in the description. That's all for now. Goodbye.